Resources Board. Can we have the roll call, please?
Chair Kohler, Vice Chair McKinnon,
Here.
Board Member Bernstein, Board Member Powell, Board Member DeSicchio, here. Board Member Bunnenberg,
here.
Board Member Wimmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. We'll announce the agenda item today. It's 467 Lincoln Avenue. I'll read off the public hearing. It's request by...
Oh, excuse me. Board Member McKenna, we just have a couple of typical items that we move through the agenda prior to the start of the agenda item. Okay. Typically oral communications and a sense of any sort of agendas, changes, additions, and deletions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Stephen. We will have oral communications. Members of the public may speak on any item not on the agenda, 3 minutes per speaker. Historic Resources Board reserves the right to limit oral communications period to 15 minutes. Do I have any participants? Appears that we do not. Agenda changes, additions, deletions. Do we have any?
There's no changes at this time.
Thank you very much. The minute approval, we
do not have any minutes for submittal to the HRB at this time, but we will have minutes at our next meeting.
Thank you. Okay, I'll announce the agenda item. It's 467 Lincoln Avenue, request by Anita Vieira da Rosa on behalf of Lynn and John Martin for Historic Resources Board review and recommendation regarding proposed alterations and additions to a residence initially constructed in 1925 that is listed on the city's historic inventory in Category 4 and located in the Professorville Historic District. The additions include a deep side porch at the first floor, a first floor mudroom, and a second floor bedroom on the rear elevation that requires individual review. Alterations include selective demolition to accommodate the additions, removal of 13 existing windows, relocation of 3 existing windows, and demolition of a tall side chimney. Zoning District R-1 parentheses 10,000. Okay, I will open the public hearing.
Oh. Yep. Well, actually, we'll maybe perhaps start off with a staff presentation.
Okay, excuse me. Staff recommendation, yep.
Sure. Thank you, Board Member McKinnon, and good morning, Historic Resources Board members. I'm Stephen Turner, Long Range Planning Manager. Pleased to introduce this project to you this morning. Our Historic Preservation Planner, Dennis Backlund, is the project planner and will be providing the staff presentation this morning. Thank you. So, Dennis.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the board. It's been a bit of time since we met, so it's a pleasure to see you gather together again. And we have an interesting house for those that are strongly interested in Tudor homes, of which there are some notable examples in Professorville. Professorville is best known for its brown shingle craftsman's and brown shingle colonial revivals, but consultants that have visited the city and have taken stock of the entire district have noted the great diversity of historical designs that one finds in Professorville, and also the fact that there are stellar examples of all of these different styles. And so the Tudor at 467 Lincoln is not an exception in Professorville, but is squarely within that group of diverse properties that are characteristic of the district. And the first thing I'm going to do before I summarize the staff recommendation is the applicant submitted a group of color photographs that you can pass around and look at. And in the staff report, we mention a home that is shown in McAllister's Field Guide to American Houses that is similar to 467 Lincoln, and I've got a copy of the photograph I'm going to hand around. And for members of the public, on our small public pedestal behind me, I've got a copy of that photograph from the Field Guide to American Houses. And then also a copy of the project plans, so anyone in the audience can look at those as they choose. And so first, oh, thank you very much. As you saw in the staff report, the staff recommended that the Historic Resources Board recommend to the Director of Planning approval of the project as presented in this particular case because it appeared to the planning staff to be compliant with the Secretary of the Interior's standards, all 10 standards. And you saw that as the primary attachment to the staff report, there was a group of findings composed by staff taking the standards one by one and then discussing how the project appeared compliant with that standard. These materials are advisory to the board from staff, and the board, as always, has discretion after observing the staff materials to arrive at the board's independent conclusion on the compliance with the standards. In the staff report, we noted that the house was designated to the historic inventory in Category 4 in 1980. It was one of that group of houses that was a direct recommendation from a professional consultant working in the city from 1978 to 1980. And the area where this house is was not in Professorville at that time. Professorville was designated shortly after the individual designations that had been made just prior by the consultant. And that was the case when this was recommended for Category 4, and that was adopted by the City Council along with a number of other homes in 1980. The house was built in 1925. That is within the very central period of the most significant Tudor homes, both in Palo Alto and elsewhere across the country. And we mentioned that the builder of the house, Frank W. Fox, was a figure in building who had been involved with Palo Alto already for 20 years in 1925, and has some significant properties to his credit. He did work with Burge Clark, and so he is, Frank W. Fox, a key figure in the historical period of Palo Alto. In the staff report, the first thing that we presented in detail was the character-defining features of the house, which we did in a bulleted list for the convenience of the board to keep checking on those as you reviewed the plans. While the board review can be diverse and can cover a property from various angles, the central task of the board that is assigned by by ordinance and by practice at the State Preservation Office and the federal government is to look at the project description as it is in this case laid out on pages 3 and 4 of the staff report, and to test out those elements of the project description, we recommend one by one against the Secretary standards. So the cardinal task of the board is, does the project description comply with the 10 Secretary standards? If so, then it's appropriate for the board to recommend approval of the project. Beyond that central task, the board can introduce other issues or can recommend modifications to the project, or can address issues that appear to the board in the course of your review. And all of that then is entered into the public record for the citizenry to refer to from now on into the future. So we have these 2 pages of the project description. There are a number of elements in the project description. As you saw in the plans, the most complex group of elements involves the window changes, of which there are a number. And at the time of the advertisement of the project, we had detected 13 windows. But on looking at the plans, there was a couple of windows very close together that we initially thought was a double window, but they're actually separate. So we changed in the staff report the number of windows that would be changed, either removed from the house and replaced with something new, or would be taken off the wall and moved to another location where that type of window better matched the new floor plan. So there were 14 windows that are involved. However, there are more than 24, including all of the most significant windows, are being retained and preserved by this project. And so while we went through the windows rather carefully, it was our decision, and we will see what your decision was, that the window changes were involving windows that were closely similar or duplicated by a number of other windows that are being retained, and that there were not any unique windows that were being removed. And so while the Secretary standards states very clearly that historic fabric is to be preserved, and that is an excellent recommendation that should be striven for as far as it can go. It is the case that when there are remodels to a house, the fact remains that when one is looking at an older home, and members of the board who are architects will have had direct experience with this situation, that the floor plans and the uses within the house, the types of rooms and uses that they are dedicated to, are quite different now than they were in the early 19th or early 20th century, and certainly the 19th century. And so when we get projects, we encounter changes that are characteristically, in the best projects, attempting to get the uses and types of spaces in the interior, which we do not regulate historically for homes, to get those into a consistency in a reasonable manner with the uses and layouts and provisions for storage and various uses within the house. And our review is restricted by the Historic Preservation Ordinance to the exterior. And so when these uses and floor plans are altered, the most typical event that occurs is that windows are moved around. For instance, in a kitchen, kitchens are rather strongly different plans than we encounter in today's desires for how a kitchen will function. And so the kitchen layout is typically changed in virtually every project that we receive, where the central sink, for example, is moved around and is built into a long counter, where if you have taller windows that are definitely historic and maybe in good condition, but they are tall, and therefore these kitchen counters and new layouts for sinks and other uses would come right up through the bottom third of the window. And if one could not change the window, one could not build a modern kitchen plan at all. One would have to follow the plans of the 1920s. And for one thing, as the ordinance does not regulate interiors, we don't have clear direction to mandate something on that like that. Of no change, but also the preface to the Secretary's standards states explicitly, and that was attached to your staff report, along with the standards, the definition of rehabilitation, and it's noted that the standards are to be applied in a reasonable manner, taking into account technical and economic considerations. And that comes directly from the Department of the Interior, who created that language. So they foresee changes, and so the standard that is followed, change, yes, but the overall character and the really defining features of a home, those should not be changed. The Department of the Interior expects cities and applicants and all those that are making applications for historic houses to study their project very, very carefully under that standard, that the character-defining features are to be preserved, so that when you look at the house from the public spaces after the project is built, you would conclude, well, we can detect a change here and there, but basically this is the same house that was there before the project in its overall character, and using the aspects of integrity of the National Register that we have worked with often, including feeling and association, undefinable elements that still are part of our actual experience. And so our conclusion was, when we studied the plans, that the applicant in the case of this project had worked exactly in that manner. How can we get a reasonable plan for the house, but taking into account the most important historical features and preserving all of those? So no unique and larger and significant windows were lost in this project. And the windows that are new are closely similar in design. They are differentiated, of course, by the modern manufacturing techniques that are scattered through the construction of a window. So it would be very, very clear to any informed observer what is modern and what is historic. But the overall design is very similar to what the historical windows were, and that allows change while preserving the overall character. That's our typical recommendation on that question of differentiation. which again, we always await the board's comments on that on each project. And so we concluded that that character was basically preserved. And we stated when we did the Secretary's findings, it's Standard 2 and Standard 5 and Standard 9. Those are the most difficult standards, or in other language, the most important standards, 2 and 5 and 9, when it comes to changing historical fabric. Because they asked that in general that not be done. And so our commentary is a little longer on those standards. But our general summary, since it is short, I will just read it into the public record. It's just 3 or 4 sentences. And it reads, the project is rated, that is by staff, is rated as compliant with the 10 Secretary standards for rehabilitation based on the evaluation findings above. Overall, compliance of the project with the Secretary standards for rehabilitation has been achieved by developing the additions as carefully proportioned extensions of the original design of the house, and by the high degree of compatibility of the new windows, by the extensive preservation of significant materials, features, and details of the house, by locating the new bedroom addition at the rear of the house, and by limiting the size of the additions so that they read as subordinate to the historical house. Those additions, as you saw them developed in the staff recommendation, probably the most significant impact in a way of the bedroom addition, that's the bigger one at the rear of the house, is that there's kind of a gable on hip roof layout on that rear facade of the house that is changed by putting an addition in front of that and then developing a gable shape to it so that the roof form at the rear changes. However, the addition does not go up to the top of the house. It is lower lying, and it is in the center of the rear of the house, while sections of the rear facade to the left and right of the addition that are more visible from the side street are preserved generally unchanged, but the addition that is in the center tried in its roof form to follow the roof forms of the house, to use the similar type of windows, and but that's basically the largest change to the house, and it was located in the least conspicuous area on the whole property. And so we regarded that as close attention to the Secretary standards, to give attention to the location of bigger changes, and then to do high compatibility of the elements of a new addition to make it subordinate and less conspicuous and preserve the overall character of the house. We thought that the project did that successfully. The applicant was in continual dialogue with the staff to discuss these designs, to try to get the applicant's family uses that are new in this structure while preserving the overall character. On the left facade of the house, as seen from Lincoln, there was the addition of a side porch. The porch is a one-story structure, and it has columns consistent with the Tudor style. And then there is a small room extension that goes up to the second floor, but it projects out from the house following the forms of the house in a rather minimal way. It does not stick out from the house and contradict the existing form, but is kind of a small addition using the same proportions and general roof slopes and things. And one final detail, the applicant pointed out in the letter that was attached to your staff report, that when they did things like compose the new bedroom addition in the back, the differentiation was achieved by making the eaves not flare up at the end as they do at points on the historical house, but rather just continue in straight lines in a discrete manner. And that was a further element of differentiation for the compliance with standard number 9. So those are our overall comments, and we await your questions and your review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis, for your usual very comprehensive review and presentation. We are now at the point of the meeting where we have the applicant presentation. 10 minutes, please. If you would announce your name, again, I would greatly appreciate it.
My name is bring it over close. Always intimidated by these things. My name is Aino Vieira de Rosa. I'm an architect. I do a lot of residential work in Palo Alto, and I love working on historic homes, so this was a particular thrill for me.
Even a little closer.
A little closer like this?
Yes.
Okay.
That's it.
Dennis's staff report is the most thorough I've ever seen so far, and I think what I can give you is just fill in a few blanks. This house is unusual because it's on a corner. The main facade is on Lincoln, and the rear is really not the backyard. The rear yard, the major rear yard, is on Lincoln, also to the side of the house. So we attempted to do several things: connect the house with this very large side yard that just is their usable outdoor space. And once again, we have the issue of modern uses in an old house where people don't have maids, and you take the maid's room and make that into a family room. So those changes in use were both for the kitchen and family room, and to have access to this major outdoor area. We all love, the clients and I both all love, the steel sash windows, but they're very cold, and starting in July of this year, it won't be possible to install those windows. So the house is odd because on the Cowper Street and Lincoln side of the house, there are steel sash windows. And then on the rear facade and part of the side facade, there are wood sash windows. So the house is already a mix of windows. And so our proposal is to oh, by the way, I noticed that the HRB letter that you have is an old one. There's one change, in that we are proposing to maintain steel sash windows at the first floor elevation that faces Lincoln and Cowper. They'll be in the existing openings. The only difference is that they're a little bit shorter because there are kitchen counters running underneath it, and that's what you see in the drawings. We thought that the new energy code would keep us from reusing those steel sash windows. That's why there was some confusion. But because the energy code has been moved from a January 2014 date to a July 2014 date, we are able to reuse steel sash windows in that area. The other windows, the wood sash windows that we're installing, you can see from the drawings, will keep the spirit and proportions of the existing steel sash, but they'll be insulated glass, and the house will be much more comfortable with that. In terms of the bedroom addition, which Dennis mentioned, that's we looked at that addition, and we continued the existing gable end out. We considered dropping it. Dennis and I had even talked about, well, do you drop that gable end to further differentiate it? But it made the rear of the house very fussy, and you've got, it just didn't look right. So we liked the simplicity of just bringing that existing lower gable out into the rear. Let's see. And then finally, we'd like to return with color. As the homeowners live in the house and develop their color schemes and ideas, we'll work on the exterior color and come back to the board with that. I think that Dennis's review was so thorough, I don't know quite what else I can add, but so I'm just happy to answer questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. That does bring us to the point of the meeting where we have Historic Resources Board questions of the applicant and the staff. Martin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ina, for your good presentation. And a question for either you or staff. You mentioned after the July 2014 about energy regulations in windows. Would staff know if there'll be an exception for historic structures that steel, if you can use steel, that may be a building code issue or a historic building code issue, not planning issue. There should be some exception to using steel sash windows in historic structures.
To my knowledge, the relevant document for 2014 would continue to be the State Historical Building Code, and we have not been informed that there are allowances that have been in that code that would terminate this year. The purpose of the Historical Building Code, which was officially adopted by Palo Alto in the Muni Code a number of years ago, the purpose of that is to give exemptions from certain code matters that would otherwise require the removal or demolition of a historic feature.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's just a general question. Since you brought up, you mentioned steel windows may not be allowed in the future. So.
Well, it's also anything new that you do to the house has to meet the current energy code. So the addition would have to meet the current energy code. The windows that we're talking about, the three steel sash windows that we're talking about preserving are actually on a piece of the house that was already remodeled once before, so they wouldn't be protected. And the steel sash windows on the second floor that we're blocking with our addition were also part of a previous remodel, so they wouldn't be protected by the energy code. So the only windows that maybe would be protected would be those on the side yard, on the side yard that's facing the rear.
Okay, yeah. I was just asking from an educational point of view if in fact, I'll take a look at the building code too.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question is on page 4 of the staff report, item number 6, under other proposed alterations to the house. It says the proposed paint scheme was not determined for the HRB meeting. When the color scheme is ready to be forwarded to the HRB subcommittee for review and return to the full HRB as determined by the HRB. Color, is that Is that part of the ordinance to pay attention to color, paint color of historic?
Color is referred to as a factor of board review in the historical ordinance.
Okay, great, thanks. Those are all my questions, thanks.
I should disclose that I walked the sidewalk around this property, and from the street, it appears that there's a very large tree quite close to that side where the porch is. Is that one of the protected trees, or is the protected tree further back?
No, there's an enormous podocarpus about to eat into the living room, and that tree will be taken down. But there are several protected oaks and redwoods on the property, and we've steered clear of those, and they will remain in good health if we get rain.
Thank you very much. That helps my depth perception a great deal. The other thing is that in your discussion, I didn't hear mention of the dormers that are up on the major roof. Were those put in as part of a later renovation of the house?
Those were put in, and I believe the Historic Resources Board looked at them. I know that Dennis said that there was a lot of study of those dormers and the proportion of the windows, and that's in a third floor attic space of the house.
That made it usable?
I don't know, because I wasn't part of the house at that time. It was quite a while ago.
All right, and there exists one historic photo of how the house looked. The old inventory photo shows how the house looked, and now we can see how it looks with the dormers. So thank you for that point.
Yes, that dormer project was a number of years ago, and the style of the dormers, particularly their size and proportion, to keep the size of them down, and there are little tiny flares on the edges of those dormers because they're in such a prominent location. That was to sort of join those new elements into a unity with the house. But the size and proportion was worked over in a number of options. And as that photo from McAllister shows that I handed out, those types of dormers in that type of location on the roof were done in historical Tudors of the same period. It's just this particular house did not have roof dormers until they were added later.
Pat?
Yeah, I just have, regarding the dormers, it's in an attic space that is not upgraded or could be, or what was the actual reason for putting in the dormers?
Well, the attic space was, the project was to finish the attic space. As I recall, I think it was a large children's playroom, something like that was the main usage they had in mind when they proposed finishing off the attic. But it was quite dark, and so they proposed these dormers, and then the review went into proportion and minimizing that size down till I still remember at the point that they're not too small and they're not too big. They're just finally exactly the right size for relationships with the house. Because dormers are cautioned in the Secretary's guidelines, but without those, they could not have developed that space for family use.
Thank you.
Do we have any additional questions from the board here? It appears that We have exhausted our questions. We will now proceed to public comment. If anybody in the public wishes to speak on subject matter, it appears that we have none. Applicant closing comments?
Question.
Yes.
Is by any chance the owner present? I say, is the owner present?
No, I'm sorry. We were hoping to meet at your last meeting, and they're out of town.
Okay.
I do have one more question that I just thought of. The removal of the existing chimney, does that mean that is there going to still be like a fireplace? Or I know we're not in here to discuss the interior exactly, but that basically is being removed to accommodate the porch, or?
The chimney would have to be removed no matter what. It could be rebuilt, but the chimney is being removed. But it's a masonry chimney. It was originally wood-burning fireplace. We're going to have a direct vent fireplace there, and we don't need the chimney for what we're doing. But it's always a problem with these masonry fireplaces and the hazard they present.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, back to anybody from the public. We have public comment at this time. There appears to be no interest in that. Applicant closing comments.
I don't really have anything special to add at this point. I just hope you'll approve this because we're really excited about the project. Thank you.
Okay, we will proceed to motions and recommendations by the board, but I'd like to precede that with discussions, motions, and then recommendations by the board. Martin?
Yes. No, this is not working.
You,
It's not going. I'll need a mic.
It might be, Beth, you might need to turn off your microphone. I think maybe you can be on it. Like that.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Chair McKinnon. As the staff report is indicating, I think you've done an excellent job in meeting the standards of differentiation by not having the flared eave on the addition. And certainly there's compatibility because I think the general feel of the project is compliant with all the standards. On that note, I'd like to actually move that the HRB approve the project as presented.
Could we just have a little more discussion before we proceed
I
with
think
the...
Beth had a...
Absolutely.
Okay. Beth?
let's see. I, first of all, am also saddened about the chimney, and yet there are, particularly in California, a number of possible hazards with chimneys that have been built a long time ago. And so that it is, I guess, with reluctance that I will support the removal of that chimney. To comment on the dormers, I think they are amazingly well proportioned, and must have taken a great deal of thought to do it, because in some ways I think they look like they should have always been there. So it was really a very fine job on the dormers. I do support the return of the colors, and leave it to the board as to whether it be full board or a committee, but would like to make the recommendation that the colors pay specific attention to the half timbering on that front facade, because that is a very significant design element. And I think basically those are my comments.
Pat?
I'm just going to make the comment that Martin initiated, that I think the project has been very thoughtfully considered, and it's understandable why these windows are being removed and around, and to accommodate a modern kitchen especially, which would not otherwise be possible. And I think every effort looks like it's been made to keep the front facade and even the side yard visible to the public as original as possible.
Margaret, do you have any comments?
I drive by this house almost every day dropping my daughter off at school. She goes to Palo Alto High School, and I've always admired it. And I really appreciate what you're doing. I think you, in a lot of ways, I think you're kind of cleaning up a very sort of hodgepodge of window layouts, and I think that you're really improving it and adding to the design. I love the balance. I love the symmetry. I think as far as the interior, it's definitely a more modern approach and the right thing to do. I think it looks great. I guess one thing that you could consider is possibly putting up a false chimney, although, I mean, right underneath it is that master bedroom with the window seat, so you couldn't really have a true chimney there. But I guess in one sense, in this photo, it really shows, that's the best one that shows the existing chimney. I mean, sort of hidden in the trees, but I
Is that the photocarpus that's leaving though? Or hardly see
yeah,
the chimney?
Maybe so. That's the tree that's going to be removed.
Oh.
Sorry.
I think so. Shall I?
Sure. The chimney is more visible in that photograph than any of the other photographs.
Yeah, it's
Is that the tree that's going to be removed?
yeah,
it's right there.
It's just an enormous.
It's swallowing the
I think
house.
it's more enormous than oak trees even.
Yeah, it's too bad. They're really native.
Okay.
So I guess in one scenario, I mean, she could put a false chimney, but is that true to the house? People would, in the future, would say, wow, there's nothing in that chimney, it's just empty. But for historical reasons, maybe, I don't know. But there's nothing, I mean, it looks like that existing chimney is just a stucco exterior, so it's not like it was articulated with any kind of fancy masonry patterns like some of the Tudors are. It was very simple in its original form anyway, so.
Thank you. I have a couple comments of my own right here. I think you've done a very good job in maintaining the principal facades on Lincoln and Cowper pretty much intact, so that the end result is that you have been compliant with the historic integrity, in particular the feeling. And feeling is kind of a nebulous term when you look at historic integrity, but I can cite probably the best definition of that was by a gentleman by the name of Bob Mackinson, who used to belong to the SHPO. And when he was out at Moffett Field looking at the hangar, his description of feeling was if somebody came back 30 years after it hadn't been in the area and looked at the project, would they recognize it and would they detect a lot of changes in it? And I don't believe that a person that came back and hadn't been here for 30 years and looked at the house after this project is complete would say that there's a apparent change. So I would say that it does meet the standard of feeling of historic integrity, because there's minimal perception of change. The other thing I'd like to just comment on is the Secretary of the Interior Standards is rather specific about replacement of deteriorated parts, and their guidelines call for in-kind replacement of deteriorated or obsolete parts. In-kind generally means as close to the exact replication of that part as can be made with modern means. And I think you've gone at some length to try to achieve that objective of in-kind replacement for the windows that you're replacing. So I think you're compliant with replacement of deteriorated components or obsolete parts with in-kind replacements. Those are my two principal comments. We'll go back to Martin. I think he was ready to make a motion.
I'd like to see if there's any more discussion on the getting the chimney item in there, because I'm looking at this photograph in here. It is part of the front-facing facade. I viewed the property only at night, and I didn't really see it during the daytime, so I don't know how prominent that is. Is there any other discussion on from board members on keeping the shell of a chimney or a replication of it?
I think it is sort of an important issue, and I understand what Margaret's saying too, and Beth, but if you just tried to replicate something that really wasn't a working fireplace again, and it would then, to accommodate the extension of the porch, I believe, it would be in a different location anyway. So
Well,
it seems sort of that removal is appropriate.
Then you start getting involved in false historicism.
Yeah.
If you start introducing a lot of things that weren't there originally. So I don't know if it's, I guess my personal feeling was if it's removed, it's just removed. Rather than trying to replicate something that's really a false item.
Although with the direct vent that you're doing from the new gas fireplace in the living room, are you directing that direct out of the back, so it's part of that porch element?
No, higher up.
It's. Oh, okay, good.
Okay, so I've heard, it looks like there's a majority of the HRB comment is let the chimney be demolished. All right, well, that goes back then. Go ahead. Were you going to say something, Michael?
Well, you're prepared to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move the staff report to approve this part.
Dennis.
I'm sorry.
Hold here.
I'm sorry, go ahead,
Dennis has a
please.
comment.
I was just if you could note whether in the motion that you would like the colors to come back to the board subcommittee, if that is your choice. And if you like, you could include in your motion whether the board adopts the findings under the Secretary's standards and the conditions of approval. And if you do, you could include that.
Yes. Oh, that is a brilliant idea. I'd like to move that the board approve and recommend to the Director of Planning the project as presented, and included in the motion would be that the project does comply with the 10 Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, and that the motion includes the recommended conditions of approval, and that any discussion of color come at least to a subcommittee of HRB members.
Do we have a second?
One question before.
Okay.
Did you say that, would it be a little more exact to say that in meeting the Secretary of Standards, we support the findings as?
Yes, that the HRB supports the findings mentioned in the staff report, and that the essentially the issue of compatibility and differentiation is met to a high degree, and that's why I'm supporting. That's why I'm making the motion.
I would then second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion stands approved unanimously. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. It looks like a commendable restoration or rehabilitation project. We will now proceed to status reports on historic projects and sites.
Yes, one I will mention and would recommend that the board go out to check again on 564 University. From the rather unfortunate state of that house as it began to what it is now has been truly remarkable. The siding was pieced together out of many pieces from the original demolition, and all the pieces by the dozens in storage, and they were able, using a concept of assembling a jigsaw puzzle, to put it back together so the pieces of siding were in the right place. And then their contractors went up on the walls and they carefully filled in any gaps and the cracks between sections of the siding, and then sanded it down to the same level. And then once it is painted, it is mostly original siding on that house, and then some new where original could not be salvaged, and yet it presents a unified surface over the house. We thought they did a beautiful job on that. And the windows in the front that had gotten broken, they had initially the contractor installed windows with plain modern glass, and after meeting with the city, the applicant agreed to acquire restoration glass with the same kind of texture and features that the historical windows had, and those are now installed on the front of the house. So we thought this project is turning out really well, and our own staff judgment on the applicant, this was an applicant that gave greater attention to detail and the greatest amount of dedication to keeping the historical standards alive as the work proceeded that we have ever experienced with any applicant. And we thought that was very fortunate because of the prominent location of this property at a true gateway location into the downtown for people coming from Middlefield and the 101 freeway. That big historical house is quite a gateway feature to the downtown, and it's been so beautifully done. And it's not completely finished yet, but almost. And we recommend that the board go and take a look at it and see what you think.
And certainly it is one of the important learnings about stressing historic fabric to every applicant who comes into this board. Just one of those learning situations taken to a painful extreme to get this back to what you're talking about.
Yes, even though the siding, it was very carefully finished so that it looks pristine. Based on my own experience, if the siding had simply been replaced, which would have been so much easier with identical siding, it would not look like it does. It conveys, as the term Michael used, it conveys the feeling of a historical property, and the restoration glass on the front also contributes greatly to that perception.
How long was that project?
4 years.
4 years.
Well,
I
let's
thought
see,
it was
maybe
longer than that. It was actually a surprise.
Yes, it was. This is the 5th year, 2014. since the original demolition by a completely different owner than as the house.
They moved it 3 times on the property, which is kind of interesting. Kelly movers. The first year, because I used to walk by it all the time, still do, they moved the house 3 different times, at least 3 different times. You know, to the side, to the back. Before that was, then the next step was, of course, taking off the 2nd floor by mistake.
Yes, and yeah,
Unbelievable.
each of those moves, it was not a dramatic change of relationship to the house. In general, the house was closer to the street, but the property was confined enough that they could not make dramatic changes on the site. It was basically getting closer to University Avenue for the reason that they could not have put that addition on the back without doing that. And the addition was very carefully reviewed by the board in study meetings and action meetings over time to get that addition just right.
Okay, Martin, you have?
Oh, what's the status of the Professorville design guidelines? We've been working on that for a long time now. What's the status for the next step?
Right, the board may remember that we brought the Professorville guidelines to you at the meeting at the end of last year. I think it was December of last year. The board provided comments on those. Staff has not been able to put a lot of effort towards further development of that due to some other priorities that we've been working on. But we expect over the next probably month and a half to 2 months to revisit those. I think the board's recommendation was to make some minor adjustments to those guidelines and then bring those back to the board. And then we would go out to the community again with kind of a final draft before we move it up to the city council level.
So maybe city council might be seeing it
I think the city council will try to see it probably not before their July break, but most likely immediately after, most likely in August.
So before the November election.
Right.
Good, thank you.
Beth?
I also have a question about it's not a project, but it is a study of the entire downtown section. And my memory was that didn't the city council include the 27 University Avenue property in that study?
Yeah, what is happening right now is a downtown development cap study, and this is a study that is required per the comprehensive plan for the city to analyze future development within the downtown area once the non-residential development floor area cap has reached a certain amount, and that amount is 265,000 square feet as of the previous study, which I believe was done in 1988 or so, maybe in 89. And that requirement is in the comprehensive plan. We've reached that threshold, so we're now undertaking this study, really to look at the impacts of additional non-residential development in the downtown area and how that affects traffic and parking impacts primarily. So we're going under a study right now to review how people get to downtown, the impacts of additional floor area to automobile trips, and we have the study is focused on the downtown area, but council also requested that we kind of include the 27 University site. This is the site of the Arts and Innovation District that was proposed by Stanford, I think 2 years or so ago now. That study and analysis of an Arts and Innovation District has been put on hold for now, but as part of the downtown cap, we have included the 27 University site as a site that could be developed in the future.
Is this a possible item that this board could discuss to provide input to that downtown study? It's a sad commentary if we have to wait till a project comes up, and it's really not fair to an applicant even to not be aware of some of the special aspects of that 27 University and the community house that is there, and what would be the vehicle for us.
The downtown development cap is really focused on really more so of development impacts of additional floor area and commercial development in the downtown area. It's not so much a design review document or a specific plan or a document where design findings would be adopted. This is really almost looking at what are the impacts of making downtown larger. So it's not expected to take into account, say, historic issues related to the downtown regarding our resources or our historic districts. We believe that that will be a future analysis. However, what we're doing in this phase one is really collecting information and data to determine kind of the extent of the challenges we're facing in the downtown. The second phase is about policy. And I think that's where the HRB could add some value in helping to develop policies that could, in the future, help formulate perhaps an update to the downtown design guidelines, which could have a section on historic preservation. So during this first phase, which is we're just information gathering and trying to understand the challenges and the problems, I don't see the HRB being inserted into that. But I think in the second phase, which is the policy development coming from that data, I think that's where the HRB could add some value.
And will you keep us informed and so that we can get it agendized?
Yes, we will. And in fact, that is a good maybe segue to a comment that I have with regard to a joint meeting between the Historic Resources Board and the City Council. Regularly or at certain times, this council likes to meet with all of their boards and commissions. The Historic Resources Board, I think it's been a couple of years since we've met with the council, and that meeting tends to be pushed out depending upon the agendas that the council are dealing with. However, we have identified a tentative date for our next meeting with the council. That would be May 19th. It's a Monday, and it would be a study session with the council, typically for an hour, beginning at approximately 6 o'clock. My expectation is that I will reach out to the chair and vice chair of the HRB and talk about specific topics that the council may want to discuss. From the last meeting, one of the issues that kind of stuck in my mind was just an overall sense or understanding by the council that they don't recall or know really the duties or responsibilities of the Historic Resources Board. We've had a number of new council members come online, and I think it might be good to maybe start off with a primer of historic resources and the role of the Historic Resources Board in the development review process. So that might be something that we start off in a very big picture level, and then we perhaps could also get down to specific projects such as the role of 27 University and the Arts and Innovation District within the downtown study. We can take a look at the professional guidelines perhaps, so we could take a look at maybe specific projects that the board has reviewed over the past 2 years and highlight some of the good work that has been doing. It's a relatively informal meeting. It's really a discussion between the board and the council members. So I think it's really seen as an opportunity for the board to tell the council about all the good things that the board is doing. So if you could pencil in May 19th at 6 p.m. on your calendar, we will bring additional information about that meeting at your next HRB meeting.
Thank you so very much. And have we heard anything more on the post office?
Martin?
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got a question and follow up on what you were just saying.
Okay.
But
Oh, okay. You
yeah,
want to do your
yeah. would there be an agendized HRB item prior to the May 19th city council meetings? So for the board to discuss what might happen or things we might discuss, or?
Yes, we expect to hold a HRB meeting in April. So probably not the first meeting in April, but at the second meeting of April, I'll put an item on the agenda to talk about possible topics amongst the HRB.
I have a couple ideas right now. Can I mention those, or is it?
Sure.
Yeah. So possible things to discuss might be simplifying the ordinance. Right now we've got 4 categories. One thought I've had for many years is, what if there's just one category, if it's historic or non-historic, and then the rules apply or they don't? This is one idea I've been thinking about. I guess that's my main idea. So.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, we have.
And then a question on the post office.
Yes, the City Council and the post office representatives are still in discussions with regards to the post office. I may have mentioned at perhaps one of our previous meetings is that the federal representatives have put the brakes to some extent on post office sales around the country. I think they have heard concerns about the sale of historic post offices or historic properties that the post office controls to private individuals for essentially private use. And they've heard those comments from the community around the country, and I think because of those comments have kind of put the brake on all post office sales. The city's proposal for the purchase of that post office would be to keep that site in public use, so it doesn't really fall within the concerns that the federal government has heard about post office sales. So we're hoping that that works in our favor and that the post office will see this as an opportunity to sell the building to the city so that we can keep it in public use. There is nothing beyond that. There's no new information about the status of that sale and purchase price and the timeline.
Just one further question on that. Does the Post Office Department have a historic preservation officer, a federal preservation officer?
My sense is that they do, but...
have they weighed in on this topic?
Well, the post office is recognized nationally. It's on the national register.
Yeah.
And that is understood, and there's no question about that designation. It's something that is inherently part of the building and is subject to whoever purchases the property to abide by those protections that the national listing affords.
Most federal agencies have a federal preservation officer that deals with issues like this. The post office, I'm not sure how it falls, if it's a quasi-government agency or a full government agency.
I think the good news is that the historic aspects of the building really haven't been called into question. And I think it's very clear by all the parties who have placed offers with the federal government for the purchase of that site, with the understanding that the building really needs to retain all of its character-defining features, both inside and out, as defined in the listing. So there hasn't been any movement that we've heard of to delist the site or to question the historic integrity or condition or any other aspect of the building with regards to historic preservation.
The reason I bring that up is when a federal agency has responsibility for historic property, leasing and sale of the property becomes what is known as an undertaking. An undertaking requires that responsible federal official to take into account and seek comments on those actions. So,
And and you probably know best on those types of issues. And we would assume that those are proceeding as they should be. We haven't been informed at the local level that any of those actions relating to the undertaking are causing any sort of delay as part of the offers that have been made.
Okay, good. We have, I guess we've had our staff announcements with this. Do we have any correspondence?
None to report today.
We've had our board members' questions. Staff approvals.
Nothing to report at this time.
And I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All third. So moved.